Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Laurie and this is Kook Spooks. I want to do something a little bit different today. We talk a lot about reading on this channel, but I want to take you on a writing journey with me. After reaching a milestone of DMing a D&D campaign for over a year recently, I decided I want to try and write a high fantasy story for adults, which is something I've never done before. I wanted to take this project really seriously, and you'll be able to see in this notebook that I've actually started fleshing out some characters and the backstories, as well as doing a little bit of free writing to help me figure out each individual voice for the ensemble cast. But then I got a bit stuck. I didn't want to just attack the story, I wanted a plan. So I returned to the staple of every creative writing undergrad student, which is Freytag's pyramid. This bad lad's got me through some tough times. Truly me in a witch's hat looking fella against the world. So I started plotting out the exposition. I know I wanted this story to be about some criminals, so we start out in a prison, with the inciting incident being a prison break. In true D&D fashion, the rise in action is around finding a magical item, and the climax is going to be being double-crossed by the man who sent you on the mission in the first place. But this is where I got in a bit of a pickle. Up to that point it's dull, but it works. The fall in action comes really quickly after that, and it's too soon. Like, I want a big fight, and is that a fall in action? It doesn't feel like a fall in action. So I panicked. Should the denouement set up a bigger boss, but then we'd need another peak, and this structure isn't working for me at all. So I found a website listing a lot of major plotting methods, and I drew them all up in the rest of the notebook. So I start with the Fichean Curve, which is an evolution, a Pokemon evolution if you will, of Freytag's triangle. Look at all those crises that all get worse and worse and worse, and look how steep that fall in action denouement is at the end. Much more representative of the story I want to tell, so I put the big bad fight at the end and the prison break at the beginning. And time to fill in those crises. I know that my prison is going to be on an island, so how are they getting to shore? That's crisis number one. I can't imagine it's going to be particularly easy, or everyone would be breaking out left, right and centre. I know a key turning point of the story is going to be when Hiraeth, our cleric and good girl character, finds her home destroyed and really embraces the criminal life. So I want to put this as our midpoint crisis, because it is, I think, a linchpin for the rest of the story and how the characters interact for the rest of the story. This is also the point they're going to realise they're not alone in looking for this item. There's somebody else interfering with their plan. I want a lot of this book to be about the journey and the getting to know each other, so finding this item is going to come kind of really close to the end of the story. And then from there we need to travel to that big boss end fight. So I backtrack a bit to finding the dungeon before we even go in. And I hesitate for a while before we go right back to the beginning, because actually they won't have any idea when they get out of the prison. How are they going to manage that? How are they going to be equipped to deal with the rest of this story? And between there and the rest of the story, there needs to be a chance for some treachery. These are villainous characters that we come to love. I don't want them to be fluffy straight away. But we do have some fireside bonding, because I love D&D, and what's more D&D than telling our backstories over a fire? Question mark, what is that next crisis gonna be? Let's go with the fall in action. We have a lot to unpack here. We find out that it's the church who wanted us to find this item, but why do they want it? What is this colon that they now know it's called? What can it do? Is it the whole institution? Is it one bad actor that was about to betray them? Who oversees this plot? Who's next? Is it up to this ragtag group of adventurers to save the day and stop it all? Maybe. And that's where I fill in that the High Priest is in fact bad. Sad face. Me hating organised religion? Who would have thunk it? But I've still got this question mark. Not anymore. There is a disease in my world called gloaming, which has affected one of the characters in the past, so I think they're going to find a village that's been infected by it, just to help build out the world a little bit, because this is the world we play D&D in. It's a world I've been working on for years. There are elements that I can pull like this, and around here I'm just adding some extra ideas that seem relevant and some links to character backstories. At this point I wasn't sure who'd be most affected by finding this village, but as you can see, definitely Alix. Decision made, time for a new planning method. Next is a method that's new to me, Kishōtenketsu. I apologise for the pronunciation of that. It's a story structure which is a 4-part narrative blueprint from East Asian traditions, and it focuses on slice of life, and it's known as a plotless structure, so it turns out not exactly what I'm looking for. But again, it was really good to show me connections between the characters and the inner states that they're in at different times in the plot. Revisiting the introduction every time is really helping me ground myself in this story. So in the key or intro box, I've got a group of prisoners, a task to escape and recover an ancient colon, which is the artifact, for the church to stop an ancient plague being set loose. To look at the character development, it might be useful for you to know who our characters are. We have a warlock rogue called Clove, who is angry and hurt and betrayed and has to learn to trust. Dallas is a wizard out for revenge and power, who puts others first in the end. Elix is my sweet, sweet prince. They are a bard fighter who has to learn to be sincere. Lovett is a dragonborn monk who only wants to achieve enlightenment through himself and looks to others to find it. High Wraith is our good girl cleric who has to become morally grey to ensure her survival and her new friends. Then we come to the 10 section, which is the twist. The twist is it's the head of the church who gave them the mission to find the colon, but he wants to use it to take power himself, spreading the plague and misfortune that they were setting out to stop. I know that he's going to be killed, but there's no way to know what damage is done, so there is a lasting impact on the world, even though they've tried their best to stop it. For the Ketsu, or conclusion, they set out to right the wrongs that they've caused and find a safe haven for this Kalon, this item, and to uncover where the plot began. They're almost a family at this point. They've done the impossible. I don't think this is quite how this is meant to be used, because I've still managed to squeak a little bit of plot in there, but not enough for this to be a tool that I think I'll return to again. Let's try something a bit different. This is one you might have heard of before. It's Save the Cat. I'd heard of it but never used it. It breaks the story down into 3 acts with a set number of parts to each. So by now we know our opening image is a prison inmate fighting with another. Our themes are stated as the warder explains freedom is possible, but they need to escape without help. Our setup is a prison break, baby. I was really thinking about how to word that, and in the end, just put that pen to paper and write prison break, baby. Our catalyst comes next, and that's High Wraith, our cleric, waiting for them on the shore. She heals them and gives them the specifics of the mission. She is such a soft girl. I love her so much, my innocent baby. And then a debate happens. Why can't they just run off? They find out a curse holds them, and they try to escape anyway, and we all know that isn't going to end well, because they have to agree to stay together as a party. There has to be consequences if they try and leave. At this point I go a little bit rogue and start just filling in the boxes I know, but I'm going to talk you through the structure in order. So as you get into Act 2, you break into 2, where the protagonist rises to the challenge, where I think Elix rallies the party, and a little bit of thieving happens to gear us up and get us on the way. B story, the protagonists need to meet a secondary character who's important, so I feel at this point Clove's warlock patron will make contact, and we'll start to explore Clove's story a little bit more. I'm checking back to my previous notes to make sure I don't miss or contradict myself in any way. Fun and games, this is rising action, and it's a chance to kind of take the pressure off but still build the story. So I've said that this is where we learn their histories, and then into the midpoint where you get a false victory or a defeat. So they come across that village ravaged by the gloaming disease, and that quite deeply affects our 2 most sensitive party members, Lovett the monk and High Wraith the cleric. Next we have the baddies close in, which is like it sounds, things take a turn for the worse, so they are dogged on the road by enemies, that typical D&D bandit flex. All is lost, a tragic event has to occur. They arrive at High Wraith's nomadic village, they go to a meeting which is attacked. They escape, but High Wraith's people are lost, and This is the breaking point for her to go to the dark side, as it were. She is running with criminals, and she becomes a criminal by striking down someone who hurt her family. Then comes the dark night of the soul. That's going to have profound consequences on High Wraith. She's going to pull away from a blossoming romance with Clove, and she attacks rather than supporting. She gives up a little bit of who she is for her own good. Then we break into Act 3, and I've got the actual heist of the Calon, which feels like it happens far too quick, so we need more depth here. Then the finale, a fight which will take on the High Priest and kill him, and the final image, they go on their way to combat the gloaming and the disease that is spread because they didn't stop him quite in time. I feel like the beginning of Act 3 needs some more space to breathe. Then we move on to Lisa Cron's Story Genius, which turns out was another tool to get to know your characters better. So in this top box we have the character, their problem, their goal and their backstory, plus in the bottom box scenes, so the plot, what happens and the consequences, and what they call the third rail, which is why it matters. It's the impact, the so what, and the realisation this causes them to have. So we go with Alix first because I am obsessed by them. Alix started out as an NPC in this campaign that I run. So Alix D'Artagnan, their problem is they are wanted by both sides of a conflict and can't be trusted by anyone. Their goal is to find a new way to live the high life, perhaps through a pardon. The backstory is they are a double agent in the court of a country called Harwild. Plot: they choose to help others over their pardon in the end. They find themselves growing close to the party, wanting to be honest, and it puts them in a vulnerable position. They'll have their heartstrings pulled. Clove will beg them to stay at one point. It matters because they walked away from an old ally they were double bluffing. They survived and they revealed him, and they were the one who put him in the prison, which is called the Halberd. I think of Alix as a courtesan who played the game at court too well and couldn't be trusted, so they went on the run and they took on lots of roles in that time. I do really want to spend time focusing on kind of the sex work element of what they ended up doing. I think it's important to show the different sides of the world. This isn't a super cosy world. I think the way I write tends towards the cosy, so including those elements of betrayal in the real world in there is going to be a challenge. So then I went for Clove Murta, our human ? Elven ? No one's really sure. Warlock, rogue. Their problem is they've got no one to get back to once they complete this job. The goal is to right some wrongs and get revenge trying. But will her patron let her? ... Backstory: to resolve her deal with the devil in the criminal underworld. But I think there's more to it than that. I think she was probably framed for a lot of the crime that put her in the prison, but she still feels responsible for it in some way. In terms of the plot, she and High Wraith slowly fall for each other. She spares someone who was involved in her arrest. They were all wretched things, so she can't blame them too much now. She learns to trust again and puts the new reputation she's earned among this party above everyone and everything else. Instead of feeding the curse that clings to her, she's thinking of how to remove it for the first time. I see Clove as a child of nobility who was thrown from that world and had to make the way to the big city and survive, and they trusted some people that they shouldn't have and got used. Lovett is a dragonborn monk who was in an order that linked colours with their meditation practices. They lived in a colourful mountain range, and they took on the name of a colour. Lovett is actually the colour of tweed, so I was thinking about tradition with Lovett and kind of adherence to ritual. They realise that their problem is that they're too focused on living in their memory and trying to achieve the enlightenment that they were always trying to achieve through their own actions, and that goal remains to become enlightened. The backstory is they were an idealistic monk who challenged and defied a malignant secret within the order because they were just so innocent and so inherently good that they thought they could challenge something that was wrong and make a difference. In the plot, Lovett realises that the living are as important as the dead and that he can balance both. Strength comes from leaning on others. He achieves enlightenment and gains spectral abilities. He wants to find what is left of his order, if anything, and start it up again in the new world that they try and make safe together. He is my sweet, sweet, soft boy, even though he is a giant bronze dragon man who has spectral arms when he gets to that point of enlightenment. Another thing about Lovett is that he is an amputee. He lost one of his hands in that battle in the monastery, so the gaining of spectral arms is really meaningful for him. What to say about Dallas Tremaine, my little cis rat man? He's not a rat man, he's just a human man. His problem is that he was experimenting with magic and they've left him in some kind of limbo. His goal is that he wants more power to make sure he never goes back to prison, and his ultimate goal was really to make sure that he never died. He was seeking lichdom. The backstory is that he was an acolyte that took a liking to necromancy. His plot is that others save him in a fight because he is essentially a glass cannon. He allows himself to listen and understand the horror of him. He tries to repay debts by saving the party in return when he could run or not bother. He tells himself the job will be easier with more hands, but he's actually liking being in a party for the first time. Dallas is a very well-to-do boy who was told he would achieve great things by a doting mother. He went to a seminary in a big city and he was proficient and he outgrew his masters. He didn't take well when they tried to stop his experiments into things that are very taboo. Last but not least is my sweet, sweet Girth. I've written Hiraeth Wellenter here. She has got many surnames in many places. I think the one I've ended up going with is Welton, which is also the name of a small village in this world. So her problem is doubting her religious orders. Her goal is to become more devout through the work she does for the church, such as taking on this mission with all these dangerous criminals. Her backstory is that she is an acolyte who, because she asked too many questions, has been kicked out of her cushy order and now has to work as a messenger, completing jobs and running orders and errands for everybody else. In her plot, she starts to see the criminals as people. She falls in love with Clove. She has to reconcile duty and the things she wants. She loses her nomadic tribe and is pushed to act like the criminals through violence and murder. She starts to see how the others fell into their lives, because she has as well. Her faith is corrupted by encountering that priest. Determined to redeem her faith and oust any traitors, she comes round to believe that actually people are worth saving again. And I think that's a really core message of the book, is that we can lose that hope, but it comes back. Not to be cheesy on you. Sorry for the truly disgusting jump cut you're about to see. I went for a cup of tea and came back, and this is the Cat O'Keefe 27 chapter structure, which goes by another name as well, which is the 3-act 9 block method, and we really cooked here. So Act 1 sets the stage for all the events in the story. You get a glimpse of your characters in their lives and the inciting incident that shakes things up. There's some tension, and then the character has to debunk that status quo. Act 2, you've got to contend with the fact that change is really here and you've got to own up to it. They do get to have fun in the new world, and they explore it and they gain skills that they need to complete the 3rd act. That sees everything coming to a head for your character, the trials they've been facing, the skills they've been gaining. They need everything they've learned up to this point to face the final showdown. I think this is such a clear structure, and it has more depth from the last one that we had that looked like this, which was the Save the Cat structure. So we just have more points of interest in each act. It gives us space for the minutiae, and I think it represents the beginning of that third act far better as well, because the midpoint actually comes towards the end of Act 2 in this setup. So in this version of the plot, it's at the very beginning of Act 3, the calm before the storm. They go to enjoy celebrations with Hiraeth's travelling tribe, and that night they are attacked, and can see that that celebration is probably where Clove and Hiraeth are going to seriously talk about their feelings, and then this attack's going to happen and totally derail everything that they've just built. And then it still leads us through the darkest point, but we have a moment of the power within where they come together and agree to forge ahead. It gives us more space to take the last few steps from this encampment to the dungeon where the colonne is hidden. In my world, I have churches for each of the major gods called spires, and it's going to be in a lost spire, which is actually, ironically, the spire dedicated to the Verdant, who is the god of decay and loss. Therefore, their followers never really saw fit to return to the spire because their god acts out in the world. I think that's quite a nice little narrative loop back to my world building. This is also where I decide that it's in this dungeon that Daedalus has the chance to grab this item of incredible power that he could use for his old experiments, but sees Clove and Hiraeth, who saved him on the battlefield before, and decides to dig in and stay with the party, and that is another huge character growth moment. We also have space for them going to the spire, finding the colonne, and coming back to the capital to meet with the church, and initially handing over the item and being lulled by a job well done. They get their pardons, that could be the end of the story for them. But then it's Daedalus, who knows what corruption looks like, who starts to question, and lots of things are going to happen here. We're going to have more contact from Clove's patron, we're going to have religious fervour and visions for Hiraeth, and huge moments of change for all of them that lead to this realisation of, we need to take down the whole church. I love that they all had their own ideas of where they were going to go, but at the end of this story they all put those ideas on hold. Even Lovett, who wanted to go and re-establish their order, actually really digs in and forms this party. And I think at the very end they're finally going to name the party. If you've ever played D&D, if you've ever DM'd, all you want to do is your party to pick a name, so that when they go to places they can say, hi, we are whatever. Critical Role have got Vox Machina, they've got the Mighty Nine, they've got Bell's Hells. What did my party pick? Slut Club 6. And you best believe the S's are the S's you drew in your textbooks at school. So their logo is that weird S thing. So all the way through the book I want it to be a running joke, a little nod to D&D players, that they're always being asked what their group name is, and they're like, well, we're just doing a job, we're not a group. That's embarrassing, being an adventuring party. And at the end they embrace the Chug and pick a name. The name that I've picked for them, I think, is hilarious. It is a name that will only matter to those 6 people in my D&D party, but they will lose their collective minds if they ever read it. It's a joke for 6 people, but actually I don't think my whole party will ever read this book, so it's a joke for maybe like 2 people. But it matters to me. And they are going to be called the Swell. And that's funny because my current D&D campaign have been trying to figure out if the Swell are good guys or bad guys for a year and a half, and they still don't know. So, which means this book is set a long old time in the past compared to the campaign as I know it now, which is fun to kind of build out the history of that world as well as the geography and the trade and the politics. It's just another layer to what I can bring to that table. Can't really think of anything else to tell you about this, so I'm just gonna speed on up. Me plugging in these last few gaps and having some stellar realisations about how this story's gonna go. Then comes another old friend the hero's journey. I've used this plot and structure quite a few times, and in the last full novel manuscript that I wrote, it outlines those steps that lead us through 3 acts, but it's helpful to do this for every character. We have the hero leaving the known world in this first segment, then the unknown world creeps in and challenges creep in the initiation section that comes next. Then we have a return, the hero triumphantly coming back to the known world, but they've been changed in some way. But those 3 acts get broken down further into 12 slices of the pie. So we've got that exposition, the ordinary world. What does this person's life look like right now? Then the call to adventure, which is quite thrillingly named. The inciting incident and how the hero is pulled into it. Then we have a refusal of the call. The hero needs to hesitate and kind of refuse that call to action before they just fall into it. Then they meet some kind of mentor, they receive knowledge or motivation or something that convinces them. Then they cross the first threshold, they leave that known world and pass into the unknown world, so this is us passing from Act 1 to Act 2. Then you've got tests, allies and enemies, the hero exploring this new world. You approach the innermost cave, something to do with kind of the goal of the quest. Again, this feels oddly placed considering my plot that we've been working on so far, but we'll move, we will continue to cook. The ordeal, the hero faces a dire situation that changes how they view the world, and this is going to be different from all those characters like we've already talked about. The one I always return to, the most fundamental change in a single moment for me, is High-Wraith seeing her destroyed village. That's kind of the first thing I normally plug in, and that's probably what I'm plugging in here. Then comes the reward, they discover what they need to achieve the goal. Then the road back, they have to return to the known world with more challenges thrown in. Then we have resurrection, you face the ultimate challenge, so there's that second peak, and they emerge victorious but forever changed. Then return with the elixir, the hero returns home with a new version of themselves. We all kind of end up back where we started, and I acknowledge that's how the characters are going to feel. They're going to feel as though, they had set out to do one job, and now they're right at the beginning of this huge quest, even though they should have finished it because they've done what they set out to do. But we can see their growth more than they can, and we can see how they've grown as a group as well as individuals. I don't think we need to take return super literally here and have them return to the prison where they started. That wouldn't work at all. But I think a return could symbolise that moment before they confront the church, where they have the opportunity to maybe return to a life similar to the one they had before they went to the prison. They get to return to society and be real people again, but they throw that away in kind of a step beyond the structure, I suppose. Here you can see me absolutely pieing off Dan Wells' 7-point plot and structure. I already know that is not going to be detailed enough for us. Instead, I am moving on and starting work on Aristotle's Poetics, which feels awfully grand for me to be doing. It was begun as a study into Greek dramas and how a character moved through that story. So I'll go through the boxes with you. Lots of it we've covered before. I'm starting to see repetitive themes that are useful in plotting, so I think this was a really useful exercise because now I know exactly what I need to do. So for our dear Aristotle, we have a dramatic action box, which is what the character's doing. I felt that this limited me to thinking about the characters at just one point of the story, but the rest of the structure kind of ekes it out a little bit more. We have an inciting incident that we all know so well now, and then we have a super objective and an objective. So the super objective is the thing they desire, and the objectives are smaller goals that they pursue in each scene. So my speech therapy brain says a super objective is like a long-term outcome, and an objective is a short-term goal or a step towards that outcome. Then we have reversal, which is a choice resulting from recognition, which is also in that mix. So again, very much like that back end of the hero's choice, realisation and return. And again, I'll never say no to an opportunity to think about goals and growth, but we are egg in the pudding here, and I'm fully aware of that fact. It did not particularly help me with an overarching plot at all. So those are all the methods I used. Overall, there are some methods I'll take forward with me for future projects. I'll definitely use Lisa Cron's Story Genius to get to know my new imaginary friends, and then I'll use Cat O'Keefe's 27 chapters to make sure I have a cohesive plot without any gaps. Then, to make sure each character has solid growth through those beats, I'll probably make each of them a hero's journey to expand on those motivators and the consequences of the actions they face. I am going to torture these little creatures after all, so I might as well make it make sense if I'm putting them through it. And that sounds like a pretty comprehensive practice and process for a writer to have, and I'm happy to have that going ahead. Thank you for joining me for this. I know it was different, it felt very vulnerable to share so much of such a fledgling story with the world, but I hope you enjoy it, and if you'd like to hear more, I'd happily take you on the rest of the writing journey with me. Take care, read something good, write something good. See you soon, bye!